Hello everyone, on today's episode we will be talking about the Cleric class and its origin in Dungeons & Dragons.
They protect, they attack, they heal and resurrect. The Divine class is easily my favorite from the bunch. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Eddie, and welcome to
Middle-Aged Barbarians. Here on Middle-Aged Barbarians, we cover a wide array of topics, from tips and tricks on how to run your games, class and monster analysis, media and adventure reviews, and news updates. So whether you are new to the RPG scene, or a seasoned player, an aspiring DM in the making, or a jaded veteran like us,
we invite you to stick around and watch this pair of guys be barbaric and tear your boredom to shreds. So, Clerics.
Now, Clerics are a class that have been around since
The beginning.
Yeah, pretty much the game's conception. The first original three classes, correct me if I'm wrong, producers were fighting men, wizards, and clerics. And elves and dwarves and halflings and stuff like that. But yeah, they were there from the beginning. They were known as being the armor-clad, weapon-wielding fonts of healing.
Basically, that's it. And that's where they basically come from, mainly from the Templars and those sorts of militant orders from Christianity. That's why it's interesting because they're very Christian coded, even though Dungeons and Dragons is a polytheistic game. So that's interesting how they kind of change them with that. So that's basically it. Something else that's important to notice about clerics is the role. How do you feel they work in a party?
Well, I mean, if at the beginning they were the only ones that could heal. Nowadays, a bunch of other classes have healing abilities. I mean, druids can heal, bards can heal, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think any arcane classes can heal.
Nowadays, yeah.
Arcane can heal now?
Bards are basically arcane. Yeah.
And even there, I may be mixing up like 4th edition bard from 5th edition bard. I don't know if 5th edition bard can heal.
Well, wizards
They can help heal during rest.
In a very roundabout way. They can give you temporary hit points. That's a sort of healing. They cannot heal you per se, the damage you have already accrued, but they can do you that. So that's basically something else that I wanted to talk to you about.
All right, that's the end of the video. That's it. Clerics, no.
No, the role in actual like military, real life military combat, because they're kind of the combat medic.
Yeah, one thing I did find interesting when I was looking up information for this, like you mentioned, Knights Templar. They also
The Hospitaliers.
But then, like the difference between a cleric and a paladin in those roles, because I would also think maybe a Knight Templar would be a paladin. At least the couple of articles and stuff that I read mentioned that paladins are more like warrior saint ideas.
Exactly.
And they mention obviously Knights of the Round Table like Lancelot, Percival, Galahad, and Saint George. Some examples of a paladin.
Exactly. What I wanted to add to that is another role that they kind of have in D&D, but it's not so explicit, and it's a military role in real life. They're kind of the chaplain of the group. Mm-hmm. And a chaplain has two uses. They work to adhere they're kind of the glue of the unit, and also they serve as a sort of missionary to the local populace. So I don't know if that makes sense to you. I have felt it, even though it isn't as explicitly told in D&D, but sometimes the cleric tends to be a little bit of face, not as good as and charming as a bard, for example, or a sorcerer, but they kind of have that role of being the wise counsel for everybody.
Yeah, and if you look at their abilities, their spells, and the stuff that they bring to the table that other classes don't, obviously they are your main healers. A lot of their spells are more support or buff, or getting rid of negative effects. Exactly. And yeah, they do have that. I don't know. I mean, the times that I've played it, usually they're more of like the sense talkers. Like they try to keep the party, while maybe not as in strict of a line as maybe a paladin with their oaths and stuff would kind of like force everybody into. But they kind of like tell, hey, that's a dumb idea. Hey, let's not do that. We don't have to hurt, or we don't have to do this, because players can go a little AWOL sometimes.
Go a little crazy. Yeah, that's what I was seeing when I was looking at other archetypes of warrior priests. They kind of take other roles. For instance, a lot of the Asian ones, obviously, they're kind of equivalent of of a monk, of a D&D monk, like Shaolin monks and some other sorts of soldiers. There's a Sohei, which is a similar discipline from Japan, and they are kind of between monks and clerics. Obviously, in real life, they don't have spells and so forth, but they also have that spiritual role. And yeah, there are a lot of warrior saints, like the Saint Sipani, which is a Sikh ideal. But like you said, they kind of would go into paladin. So it's interesting how they really overlap those two ideas.
Yeah, I mean, the 2014 Player's Handbook describes them as intermediaries between the mortal world and the distant planes of the gods. And as varied as the gods they serve, they strive to embody the handiwork of their deities. No ordinary priest, a cleric is imbued with divine magic.
Yeah, and that's basically what changes clerics in D&D from real life, because the pantheon is so diverse and so different compared to, for instance, mostly we spoke about mostly either animistic or monotheistic religions. And
I don't know, I hear cleric nowadays and I think that's like a 4-letter word. It's
complicated. Yeah,
I don't.
In real life, it's complicated.
I don't like them too much in real life. In the game, love them. I mean, because you're talking about a character that has the ability to help the other group, help everybody else in the group, keep them alive. Has the ability to actually wade into combat.
A little bit, yes.
They have access to skills that give them like a good RP worth. Like you say, they can be a secondary face if the group doesn't have one. Or in certain situations where, I don't know, maybe your knowledge, history, religion, or your high wisdom scores will give you a little bit more of an edge than just using a charisma-based skill. And I mean, the new spells and the stuff that they've been getting in the last couple of editions also make them a divine magic threat on the field.
Yeah, and think about it a little bit as well. Speaking of community, which spells, either druid or cleric, which are very similar, but which spells would an actual peasant would like to have? Well, healing, fixing things, creation,
getting rid of all the sores on my feet from working in the field,
stuff like that. Getting rid of plagues, things like that, and that's a cleric's domain.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. Other than like those, like you mentioned, the closest kind of examples that kind of embody what they are, I don't see many like pop references, like characters in modern media.
No, because they go paladin. That's what happens.
Yeah, I didn't see anything. I mean, obviously you can look at like Vox Machina, and it's
the actual D&D based, but
D&D based stuff. They're gonna have clerics. I mean, if you go to Goblin Slayer, you have the Shaman Lizard, which is a weird hybrid mix of classes, but there's a little bit of cleric there, and obviously Priestess. But Priestess, I think, is there like I don't know. It's a different kind. I mean, I don't. It doesn't translate directly into the game, but that would be, in my opinion, like the closest thing to a cleric. And I think the character's name is Pike in Vox Machina, which is the halfling cleric.
And if we think of the quintessential priestly companion of a group of adventurers, that would be Friar Tuck from Robin Hood. And he's not a Knight Templar per se. He's more of a sort of trickster.
Yeah, if you would tell me, oh, you want to play a cleric, and you hand me a sheet with Friar Tuck on it, I'd be like,
that's not a cleric.
I mean, at least I don't see it. But that is what is considered.
That would be a priest that helps the group. I mean, you could play a cleric with those attitudes, but it's not armored. It's not like the whole package really comes from the Templars and those militant orders from Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Now, it is interesting to see how the cleric has evolved, from the origins up to like the 24 edition. I mean, wisdom has always been their main stat. They use that for their healing, their turning, and everything. Hit points are usually around Dieta level, so they're in the middle of the pack. They're not a high spongy class, but they're not a glass cannon, just blow them away kind of thing like a wizard would be. In first edition, they had access to any armor and shields. There was a caveat that they could only use blunt weapons. They weren't allowed to use swords, anything slashing or
Oh yeah, they couldn't
poking,
shed blood.
as to not shed blood, which is kind of weird because if I hit you over the head a couple times with a blunt object, you're probably gonna bleed.
Oh, well, unless you have like the priestly techniques not to do that.
Yeah. I don't think there was subdual damage in the beginning. And it even described them as having the purpose of fortifying, protecting, and revitalizing, which has stayed true, I think, to the current era of D&D.
Yeah, the combat medic role still.
The second edition was pretty much the same. Something both of these editions had was like a very limited access to spells and spell power. They were I think first level, I wrote this down somewhere, hold on. I think they had like one spell at level 1. And I don't think they got another spell maybe until level 3.
Oh my gosh.
So it was very, very restricted how many times they could heal, how many times they could cure. And they do mention that they could have offensive spells, but it was just like a reverse healing, like inflict wounds or unhealing word or something would be maybe something nowadays that which would actually be kind of cool. But then they'd be a bard. No. So second edition introduces the mythoi. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Later it becomes like their domains.
Yeah, you get extra powers depending on which sort of god you worship, right?
Yeah, because at the beginning there wasn't really a god or any gods particularly for the clerics in the original editions. And then they start making in the mythoi, and that turns into the domains. And yeah, you get like domain spells. You get certain abilities depending on which mythoi they had. And the book described that for certain mythoi, you would need certain requirements. Like if you wanted to worship a god of war, they put an example of having a minimum strength and constitution score above the wisdom. Or if you wanted to be a cleric of, I don't know, a goddess of beauty, you'd have to have a higher charisma score.
Yeah,
so I thought that was
a goddess of trickery, high dexterity, and so forth.
And there were also certain limitations, which is on par for the original editions. Humans had unlimited access to the class. They could advance.
Limited levels.
And then there were certain races that could only advance to level 6, level 4. And in those games, which I haven't really gone too far into reading about bastions, which is like the new feature that they're trying to add in now. But back then were the strongholds, and the higher levels you'd get followers, you'd get your own stronghold, and you'd have other attributes and stuff. So even that was kind of limited to other races, other species, except for the humans. Yeah. And other, like I think half orcs and elves, they could be half classes. Like they'd have to be some kind of a mixed class in order to advance, even as a cleric. And you couldn't worship just any god. There were certain racial divisions. Only gnomes were allowed to be clerics of Glittergold. What's his name?
Carl Glittergold.
Carl Glittergold. Garl. Sorry. I mean, it goes to say, yeah, you can worship them, but you're not going to be a cleric.
Yeah, Corin Latherian won't give you powers if you're not an elf.
Not an elf. And remember when Groomsh was Groomsh? And only orcs and half-orcs could worship him? Or, yeah, him.
It's a him, yeah, definitely.
Anyway. Now, third edition, which is, I think where it really branches out, is when they get like level 0 spells, which is more like the modern day cantrip, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but they're not unlimited. You had a limited number of 0 spells.
Well, yeah, but it was something easier. You weren't limited to just one level 1 spell.
Yes.
It opens up. You have access to more stuff. You have the domain spells.
The domain powers, which were really, I mean, I still remember mix matching and getting travel with what's the best domain with war. So you could wield a two-handed sword and have like some extra speed, crazy stuff you could do.
Yeah, it was. There was more of a variety in the different builds and stuff. And something that was kind of cool that they did back then was you could like exchange a memorized spell that you had
for the ones in the
and you could just use like a cure spell.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you could put in your domain spells.
No, there was a.
But you could burn a spell, like let's say spiritual weapon. I don't know if I don't remember if it was there back then.
Yeah, it was there.
But you could burn that and then cast healing level 3 or level 2.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you couldn't do that with. Sorry, no, you couldn't burn the domain spell. That's what you could. That was a restriction. Only the domain spell had to be that spell. That was the way it worked.
And they had certain alignment restrictions, not so much racial this time around, but more of an alignment thing where if you were going to worship a lawful good deity, you could be up to one step away, which basically meant you could be lawful good, you could be lawful neutral, or you could be neutral good. But you had to be you couldn't be 2 steps away from either one of those axes.
Yeah, and some cases, like Saint Cuthbert, which is one of my favorite gods, they even restricted you a little bit more. For instance, for Saint Cuthbert, you can only be true neutral. He's a lawful neutral god. Lawful good or lawful neutral. You could not be lawful evil, which was pretty interesting that they had. And some other evil gods had a similar restriction. Or neutral that tended evil had similar restrictions.
Now, 4th edition is where, I don't know, things just got all different. Because you didn't have spells. You had your at wills, your encounters, dailies, utility powers that advanced just like all the other classes. They did get a certain debuff to the type of armor they could use, because before they could probably use what would be more commonly known as either all armors or a restriction up to like the medium armors. Here they could only have, was it cloth, leather, hide, and chainmail.
Like simple armor.
Yeah, so they really brought them down. They brought them down to simple weapons, simple melee and ranged. Because I think before they could even use any kind of weapons other than the restriction we mentioned before. What was cool is that they had like a channel divinity ability, which was their way of using the turn undead. And if I'm not mistaken, this is where Healing Word kind of comes in first before they changed it for the newer edition. And it was, I think, 3 times a fight you could cast Healing Word.
Yeah, you can change your divinity to healing or inflicting if you're evil. Or was that no longer the case on 4th?
I think 4th edition you could still flip it around. But it was different because this was like an encounter skill. You didn't have to spend, I mean, you could spend, use your abilities to heal, because the at-wills, the encounters, they had secondary effects. So there were like encounter powers that you hit, you do a lot of damage, and you can heal somebody. But this was their way to cast like cure wounds frequently. And then 5th edition, I mean, basically it goes back to the 3rd edition kind of like setup. And I mean, the only big deal is there were some like newer subclasses that would give you access, domains that would give you access to like heavy armor usage. And with the buff to healing now in the 24th edition, they're really powerful.
Yeah, and their utilities, their more utility powers are really interesting nowadays.
So, I mean, I guess the last thing I'd like to talk about is how would you use a cleric or play a cleric?
Well, like we said,
I don't remember you actually playing many clerics.
I rarely played cleric. Yeah, because I kind of it feels like support. It feels like you said, the sensible part of the group. But the other thing is cleric, kind of in the world building. Well, since gods are important in the world you're playing with, well, that's kind of what their use is. I mean, they're kind of good as hooks, as you had a vision from your god that you have to do such and such thing, and the DM can use that, and that's cool to have that option there.
Yeah, I mean, as a DM, it would present another level of maybe semi being prepared, because you would have to at least look a little bit if the player actually cares, because there's probably players who don't care about the actual deity, they just want to use the class. But then you would have to always include an area of worship or a temple or another like authoritarian figure of that same organization for them to look up to, or maybe get orders.
Yeah, exactly.
Have always present the tenets, their belief system.
Yeah, that's kind of something that's kind of implicit, although D&D doesn't really restrict you on that.
It doesn't require you to do it.
But you kind of expect them to be a church behind a cleric.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are deities that don't really have like organized proper churches. But
well, like for example, with the group that I'm running with the new players, my wife's character is actually
a cleric.
She's a cleric of, I forget the name of the deity. It's like an elf deity of life and going after undead,
cool.
Which is kind of like what I'm pushing her into, like remembering. And when she's in a town and there's a temple there, always try to have like a reminder. Oh, there's a temple where you can go and pay homage or give your tithing, or just do something regarding that and bring them back into the narrative. Yeah,
so to speak. Yeah, and also that helps. Even peasants could recognize. Oh, you're a cleric of so and so. Can you help us out with this?
Yeah, you have to help us. It's your calling.
Yeah.
Now, could you envision a party conformed of, let's say, 4 or 5 clerics, but all different deities?
Yeah, of course. Particularly in third, that would be a very easy thing to do, because you could get like very different domains, and you could get kind of your. That was part of the problem in third. They were too overpowered. You could make your cleric rogue with trickery to get the skills, and I mean you wouldn't have sneak attack, but you could get all the utility skills, and you can do fighting and so forth. Of course, you could do it. I mean,
yeah. I think it'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I think the mono party, a mono class party, that would be the best to do it with cleric.
Plus, you're always gonna have somebody there to heal.
Yeah, and with the backgrounds and so forth, you can build it so you can have all the utility you need to serve. Plus, remember, you have ritual spells, which can also help in some other regards and so forth, and probably magic items to help you with the stuff you cannot really do, which is very little in D&D.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how you guys like to play clerics, if you like them, if you don't like them. What your thoughts are on the class, let us know. Yeah. But I think that would be
it for today, yeah.
That would be the cleric.
So that's the end of the video. If you haven't already, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and please feel free to leave us your comments, suggestions, and questions below.
Also, come follow us on our other social media, like Instagram, TikTok, and join us on Discord over on the Indie Hobby server. Links in the description below.
And as always, remember to rage responsibly. We'll see you in the next episode.
Roll the dice!